Alright, so now I've let this dry out a little bit. It's dry enough that it's not really too sticky, and it's dry enough that it's lost most of its soft flexibility. But if I do squeeze this enough, I can change the shape of it a little bit. I could easily carve out of the surface. I could easily cut it, but it has dried out enough that I could start adding some more coils to it. So I'm going to start rolling out some here in a minute, but I just want to point out the inside. The inside's pretty smooth. I've got a little bit more work to do down here yet, but if you look up here, this is pretty smooth here, and I need to work on the outside to get the same sort of quality. So I'm going to just take my rib like I've been doing and go over this outside one more time. Another trick that can be done with the serrated ribs is if you take the serrated edge and go over the surface of them, you usually can get all of the high points to be sort of scraped away. And then I could go back in with this metal rib and smooth them out. And that will give you a pretty nice surface also. But I can do a little bit more of this kind of stuff later. Once I've got this built up a little bit more, I can come back and do more. I don't have to do it all right now. Besides, I'm going to be handling it, so I'll probably put more dents and fingerprints in there and things like that. So I don't want to get too crazy and too focused on that yet. I'll come back to that later. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to speed up a little bit and put 2 more coils on here and really make these coils big. So I want to try to get a good maybe 3 inches out of this in these next 2 coils. Just need to get a little bit more water on my sponge. Remember, always keep your clay bag closed. Don't let it sit open, especially if you're if you got it in the house with the heat on. You got heat blowing and air moving. They'll dry out pretty quickly. So right now I'm just kind of shaping this a little bit by paddling it into the start of a coil. I can start rolling. I'm just stretching it out a little bit more before I start rolling. This is going to be a pretty long coil, so I'm just going to start out by using 2 hands right away. The smaller ones I don't usually. And I'll pay attention to how wide I've got to go, or how long the coil needs to be. So I need to go just a little bit longer, if you can tell. Doesn't quite reach all the way around. So just want to point this out because you might not be able to see this exactly. I've got an edge right here on my coil that's getting a little too flat. It's not really round. So I'm stopping and I'm going to press that out a little bit and try to get it back to round before I start rolling more. And I don't want to keep going. If it starts getting lopsided, I've got to stop and go fix it. Alright, so now I think I've got more than enough. So again, I'm just flattening this out a little bit. trying to flatten it out to the same thickness of the piece. Flip it over so it doesn't get stuck. Let's do a couple stretch throws and go back to just dampening the surface, going over it with a serrated rib scoring tool. You'll see me kind of off camera. I'm cleaning my tools. I've got a garbage can right here next to me. I'm cleaning my tools right in the garbage can and trying not to clean them on the table. If you clean them on the table, you're going to just add tons and tons of little bits of clay chunks that are going to dry out really quickly and cause crumbs to get stuck in the surface of your clay, or get onto the floor and then get stepped on and tracked around the house. So I try my best to never let that stuff get on the floor. I've got a little pile of crumbs here, but I'm right next to my garbage, so it's not much for me to just scrape those into the garbage. And I could use my scraper for that. Then they're not going on my floor in my studio and tracking through my house. Alright, so remember, when we score this one, I'm scoring this edge here. So I'm going to get that wet first. Probably could have gone a little bit thinner on this. I'm going to try to stretch it a little more. As I'm comparing it to my wall, it's pretty thick. Just need a little bit more water. So obviously, as your bowl gets larger and wider, you've got to roll longer coils. Now, if you can't roll one this long, you can do 2 coils on the same ring. So, like if I started here and I was only able to make it halfway around, I could add another coil and finish it off. It doesn't always have to be one continuous coil. If you can get it to be, that's great, but that doesn't always work out. Alright, now this kind of gets tricky when you've got this much clay. So I'm sort of holding this coil up and wrapping it as I push down with this hand. Just trying to get it in place the best I can, and I'll adjust areas if I need to. Also, I left since my last video, I left my vessel out, my bowl out, for a few hours in my studio uncovered. I wanted to let it dry out a little bit. In my studio, a couple hours probably amounts to maybe 1 hour if you're doing it like, you know, somewhere in your house. Like I said yesterday in the video, it's a little bit cold in my studio, and there's not much air movement, so things don't dry out very fast. So I was actually gone for a fair portion of the day today, left it sit out, and it was perfect when I got back. So you might try, if you need to let things dry, try just letting them sit for an hour uncovered and see if that gets close to what you need. But just do not forget to come back and wrap it back up. If you forget to wrap it back up, then you're going to be starting over, unfortunately. Now, something that happens too, and I put this info back in the beginning somewhere, is if you get clay that's too dry, let's say I dried this out and forgot to come back and I left it till tomorrow, and this was like totally dry, I can't really put wet coils on top of dry clay because there's shrinking that's happening as those coils dry. So the clay that's been dried has pre-shrunk, and then the clay that goes on top is going to shrink afterward, and it's going to end up cracking and pulling away. So if you do end up over drying it a little bit, get it nice and wet on the first, the top inch or inch and a half. Get it nice and soaked and wrap it back up tight and let it sit for a little while. And that should help rehydrate it a little bit. You can even use a little bit of paper towel. I'm just going to pick this up a little bit. You can use a little bit of paper towel to help keep things damp as well. Alright, so now I've got my coil on there. As always, I'm going to start by blending into the surface of my clay. I do the inside first a lot of times. I don't think it matters. I got a slice on my thumb today, so my left thumb is a little bit out of commission. So as you're working on this, this becomes very repetitive. Obviously, you're doing the same steps over and over again. So as you go on, as you put more coils on this, you should be getting better at this step. It should be speeding up for you a little bit. You should be doing a better job of getting things smoothed out. If you're not, then you need to start paying attention a little bit closer and how to make those seams a little bit better. So this one I'm going to try to let you see a little better over here. I'm just pushing this coil down into that original one. We've seen that a couple times now. So that looks pretty rough, but I'm always going to go back with the rib. I think on this one, I'm going to flip it upside down. And I can pull this up a little bit more. And then use my rib to smooth it out a little bit. So I've done that with my finger first, then start pulling that rib over the surface. Tools you could use at home to do this, like I don't have enough metal ribs to send home with everybody, but if you've got an old Amazon gift card, iTunes gift card, or something like that that you're not using anymore, those can be used as ribs really nicely. The edges are nice and smooth usually, they'll work great. So if you need a rib, try that and see if you like it. I guess it doesn't even have to be used up, because as long as you got the code on there, you can still use it. So iTunes gift card, some sort of gift card usually will work when you're doing that. Alright, so now I'm going to start to stretch And I want to stretch this open and widen it out. So my first stretch here, I'm just pinching to thin out the wall a little bit. And I'm looking down from the top at my circle to see how close I am and see where I need to stretch more. Making sure that I'm keeping it symmetrical. And going back in and pulling that clay down over the surface where I have to. There's a couple spots where I could kind of see the seam and I don't want to be able to see it. I want to smooth it out completely. Now on this one, so I'm going to sit back here a little bit, and I'm looking at the profile, and I want this to continue to curve outward, just a little bit more, and then I'll start just taking it out the rest of the way, just keep it straight. So on this next round of pinching, I'm going to do that trick again where as I'm pinching, I'm pulling my thumb up, because I want to get that clay to start stretching out a little bit more without thinning out so much. Hands getting tired. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, I'm way low on this side. This side over here is way lower than this side, so I'm going to stretch out this side a little bit more and see if I can lower that down a little bit to match. And I'm going to see if I can bring this side back up just a little bit to match. Now I've got something that's a little bit more symmetrical. Now I know you guys won't have this nice wheel to work on, but if you have anything at home that you can use and spin, that will make your job a little bit easier. But if not, it's doable. This was just helpful for me because I could show you all the sides of this really easily in the video. So I think at this point I've been working on this project for about 40 minutes total. Now, I don't expect in 40 minutes you'd get this far. Probably is going to take you a couple class periods to get to this point. There might be a little trial and error. You might have to cut some pieces off if something doesn't work quite right. So don't expect to go quite as fast as me. Okay, that looks pretty good. I've got a little scraping to do on the outside, and then I'm going to do my next ring. And then I'll pause. That's pretty good. So we're getting ready here to put on my next coil. And I've got a good chunk of clay left over from my last one, so I'm going to use that again. That's going to be going down on here. And I'm going to need to roll a little bit more. Finish that off. Now at this point, you shouldn't be through all of your clay yet. This isn't even probably 4 pounds. I can go quite a ways more. If you're through all your clay and this is as big as you've made it, you probably are making your walls too thick. And you might have to make some adjustments. Alright, I've got a pretty big coil here, so I might not need that extra one. Again, as I roll this out, it's pretty long. I'm going to use both hands. Try to keep it as evenly rolled as possible. Now, one thing that I run into a little bit of an issue was once I start getting my angle to come out this far, it's harder for me to put these tall ones on here like this because the angle that they need to bend. You might have a problem with it. If you do, if you run into problems, just go back to smaller coils. I'm going to try another really big one here so I can get some good height out of this second video. But I might be pushing it a little bit. This might be too tall. We'll see. It's never a bad idea to just experiment a little bit, see what works well and what doesn't. If something doesn't work, then ditch that idea. If it does work, then keep doing it. One thing I haven't talked about much during the videos is making sure to take photographs of your work. I want to be able to see your progress on a daily basis. So we'll be uploading things to a Google Slide, and it'll be the same Google Slide for everybody, so you'll all keep your stuff in the same one. And that allows me to see your progress and how much you're doing every single day. Ooh, this might be too much. I think I've got too much clay. This might be too heavy. So, since it's too heavy, I'm going to dry this out a little bit with my blow dryer. tough, but I'm gonna go for it. Maybe I don't know. We'll see. This one might be a failure, and I might have to take this one off and try it again. We'll see. But I'm willing to fail, that's okay. It's not so bad once I've got got it started. I can cut the extra stuff I don't need off. Okay, that was close. I didn't think I was going to be able to do that. I thought for sure I was going to lose it. Now this isn't sticking very well because I torched it, so it's a little bit dry, so I'm trying to put some moisture back on it. Now this one, as I'm looking back at it, I got that on there really funky. So before I go into this stretching thing and compressing and attaching, I'm going to try to fix it a little bit. Like this side here is sticking way out too far. So I'm just going to push that back in so that it's right on top like it's supposed to be. Same with all this right here. It was just way too far outside. That's a little better. I've got this weird funky top here, but I'm going to show you guys how to cut that off here before too long. Okay, so I'm going to do the attachment here. I'm going to pause the video, and I'm just going to turn it back on once I've got that whole thing attached so you don't have to watch the whole thing. Alright, so I've got that blend done. It took me about somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes probably to get around the whole thing. But right now, the problem that I'm having is that the top of this is not very level, but I can fix that later. And if I keep going out any wider, this thing's going to start to become a little bit unstable, and it might start collapsing or slumping a little bit. So when I pull this one out, I'm going to try to not pull it out quite as wide and keep it a little bit taller. So remember before I was pulling out with my thumb? This time I'm actually going to pull in a little bit and try to get the walls to go back vertical. I just don't want it to get too wide. I don't have a very wide base on this piece, so I can't go too far out or else I'll start to lose the walls a little bit. So this time I'm pulling the clay up with my thumb this way. I want to go back vertical. Which is also a little bit difficult for me to get it to go back too vertical, because remember as I pinch the walls, they open up a little bit. So I'm pinching them and it is stretching a little. So I'll have to try to fix that a little bit. But I'll show you a couple tricks if that becomes an issue. So I'm pulling this clay up with my fingers on the outside and my thumb on the inside just to press against. Now I'm just trying to thin it out and make sure that the walls are an even thickness. There's no big fat thick spots, there's no thin spots. And I definitely think I shouldn't go any wider. Okay? But now if I'm looking right here, this profile here does not look good to me. As it comes out, it's sort of interrupted and doesn't follow the rest of the shape. So I think what happens is I ended up making this coil a little bit too wide. I made it too big to begin with, and when I put it on, it just ended up being too wide. So if you remember back, I said when I was rolling this coil that I thought it was too big, but I was going to try it anyway. I was right. It ended up being a little bit too big. So I'm going to try to adjust this and make some changes to the diameter before I go any further. And then this would be a good place I could let it sit overnight. So again, I'm doing this at night. It's about 9 o'clock. So I would let it sit and dry a little bit overnight. In your case though, you might just have to let it sit out maybe for a couple hours throughout the day. Okay, so what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take out, I think, 4 little slices of this thing. So the first slice I'm going to take out just right here is only going to be about this much. I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to do the same thing. A little slice here, and one here. Now when I take these slices, it's important, hopefully you can see my X-Acto knife, it's important not to cut these straight. I want to cut them at a little bit of an angle. So I'm going to cut that angle first, so this is the angle that the tool is. I'm going to cut the same angle over on the other side. So that I can put them back together and they overlap. See how they overlap like that? Okay? I'm going to do the other ones. Same thing. Slice it at a bit of an angle. Another tool that would work well for this actually, if you've got one, would be like a little wire. Cheese slicer works, although you might not be able to go very far down. Cheese slicer is a great tool for cutting clay in hand building mode. That was a bad cut. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put all these slices back together, and it's going to close up the diameter of my piece and make it not so wide, because I remember I said I overdid it. Right? Just like all my other times, I'm going to just wet the surface a little bit and score it a little bit. And then push this back together and bring the top up and overlap. Now it leaves a kind of a seam right there. I wouldn't worry about that seam too much right now. I would let this heal for a little bit before I go back and smooth it out. Really important to make sure you've got a good score line, or I'm sorry, a good score mark on the surface. You've used a little bit of water. It shouldn't be dripping everywhere. That's 2. Now it's closing off my diameter a little bit. So I just won't do any coils that big anymore. That was just too much. And it's not uncommon for people who are doing coil building like this to have to make that adjustment. But it's better to do it early than to do it later. You want to do it when the clay is still relatively soft and pliable. So that's one fix you might have to do while you're working on this project. Another thing that works would be to get a little paddle of some kind and paddle this. And anything like, I've just got this little wooden stirring stick. This would work fine for a paddle. And I can actually paddle this clay back into shape. So if it's sticking out too far, I can paddle it back in a little bit. I'm just looking at the profile and making sure it looks good. I think I got one side that doesn't quite look good right here. Trying to fix that now before it's too dry. I think part of my problem was I should have let this dry a little bit more before I put this one on there. But that's sort of how this medium works. You've got to constantly be improvising and adjusting your techniques. That's better. Now I've got this little bit of a crack here. I'm worried it might pull apart, so I'm just going to put a little bit of clay over the surface of it, blend it in, basically make a patch. And I got a little extra there I shouldn't have to worry about. At this point I'm going to do a little bit more of this paddling. And try to paddle in some of the curves here. This also helps to flatten out and even out all your pinch marks. Okay, a little bit too soft for me to start doing that with this right now, so this would be a place I'm going to leave it. I'm going to add one more little patch over this right here. But when you make a patch, if you have to, you need to blend it out so that you can't see it was ever put on there. So I'm going to blend this out. Just reinforced the seam a little bit, but now you can't even tell there was a seam there. Okay, don't leave them visible. If you haven't yet, make sure you do a nice cleanup job so that you don't get in trouble for making a mess, and I don't get a phone call or an email from a parent complaining that their kids are making messes in their home. I want you guys to make sure you're practicing maintaining a pretty clean workspace as much as possible. So again, a damp hand towel works well. When you're done working for the day, make sure to wipe up all your crumbs. Any leftover clay that you have goes back in the bag. And you can even rinse your tools off in the sink, whatever you're using, whether it be a fork or whatever, hair comb, anything works, okay? So I'll come back after this is dried a little bit and do some more shaping, and then maybe do one more coil. Alright, so I did a pretty significant alteration on this thing in the last video. I cut 4 sections out of my bowl and closed them back up in order to close up the diameter a little bit. So anytime you do a sort of a surgery like that, it's always a good idea to just wrap it up after you've done that and let that sit to heal for at least a few hours. Okay, so what I did with this one is I finished that in the last video, and I wrapped it up in plastic tight and just let it sit. And then after a few hours for that to heal a little bit, I let it sit out a little bit longer to dry. So now I've got, it's not quite as soft and flimsy up here. I can go back and start working on the scraping. So again, I've got my metal rib. I'm going to work with this tool to really try to smooth this out. And I'm not quite going to be done yet, but I'm starting to think about final smoothing and making sure things are perfect. There's more I want to do with this shape still, but we'll see how much time I've got. Good idea, especially once it's this wide, to make sure that you're adding a little bit of pressure on the piece while you're doing that scraping. You just don't want to open up any seams or push this out too far. It's hard to get it to go back in once you've pushed it out too far. I've got one little seam here that I didn't quite close up enough, so I'm just going to do one of those little patches again. And remember to blend that out as much as possible so there's not any evidence that there was a patch there. So hopefully when you're done, you can't actually tell where those cutouts were if you need to do those. Alright, so this has dried a little bit, and the regular smooth scraper is not quite smoothing it out as much as I would like it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with this scraper here, and this will allow me to remove some of the surface, the high points. Kind of makes a cool texture. do that first. Then come back, help if I dip this in a little bit of water. Then come back and go back and smooth over it. That's a much better surface now than it was. It would kind of be the ultimate cereal bowl. You could put like a whole box of Lucky Charms in here with no problem. Now I'm really slowing down at these stages and working on the shape, making sure that it's perfect. But it is getting a little uneven on the top, so I might work on a way to go ahead and smooth that out, level that off a little. So I'm going to work on the shape a little bit. I'm going to pause it so you don't have to see. I'll pick it up when I get back.